Well, hello, everybody. I am so excited to see you tonight. I'm Carol Pasternak, the Monarch reporter, the Crusader, reporting to you from what we now know as Toronto. I am on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis people. And I get to present you with Sara Dykman and talk about butterflies in the cold of the winter in the off season. And that's why we're doing this, so that we can really get excited about monarchs again as they're in their place in Mexico. Sara, I've got to tell you something. For me, this is a big book. There it is. It's a big book. And what does that mean? It means that since high school, I have read fewer than this many novels. Okay. And one of them is your book. I just don't have the concentration to read a lot, but your book is so engaging and written in a suspenseful poetry that had me wanting to know what was going to happen next. I for sure couldn't go to sleep until I was satisfied that you had found a place to stay the night. I was a little nervous on the downhills in the rain with the trucks, when you were going to get upset about something that you didn't like in nature or about borders. But the brilliant part of it is that you wove in the butterfly's life history and anatomy together with the most current science, such that any monarch expert would still learn something from you. And one of the reasons is that you consulted with experts, which you're going to talk about in a minute. First, I'm going to introduce all of you formally to Sara. Sara has a degree in wildlife conservation from Humboldt State University in California. She's most passionate about monarchs? No, amphibians. She likes amphibians more than monarchs, but we can forgive that because she's written this fabulous book and been extremely successful in getting the word out about monarch butterflies. She rarely works more than 6 months at a time. For the most part, she creates a joyous, meaningful, modest, low carbon footprint life by taking on contracts in her field in order to fund her next adventure. From her book, the idea to bike or website from Mexico to Canada and back with the migrating monarchs arose from a simple wish to visit them. Over time, I no longer wanted to just visit the monarchs, but to accompany them by bicycle on their great migration. In 2016, I stopped daydreaming and picked a start date for my journey, the spring of 2017. My idea was now a plan, and I had a year to work out all the details. As with every adventure, planning was part of the fun. For a year, I immersed myself in emails, web design, press releases, and business cards. I talked with scientists, clicked through websites, pored over maps, questioned my plan, and traced the vague outline of a route. Eventually, there was nothing left to do but start. In January 2017, I braved a, get this, 52-hour bus ride from my hometown outside Kansas City, Kansas, followed by a 2-day bike ride to arrive at the parking lot of El Rosario Monarch Sanctuary in Michoacan. Now, you say you consulted scientists, and I know one of the scientists that you consulted, and his name was Chip Taylor, and he told me that at first he was a little skeptical about you riding your bicycle from Mexico to Canada and back. Sara, can you tell us anything about that conversation? How did you convince him that you were for real?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation. And I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. So Thanks everyone for showing up tonight. I emailed Chip because I needed to know a few things about monarchs before I set off. And I sent an email only expecting I probably had like a 20% chance. I thought maybe he'd reply. And his reply was, cool, why don't you come to my office and we'll talk? And Monarch Watch is out of Lawrence, Kansas. And my parents live in Kansas City. So it was a pretty close connection. And I went there and he sat me down and we talked about monarchs for several hours. And I mean, this man has easily talked to hundreds of thousands of people about monarchs, but for that 2 hours, it was like he'd never done it before. And that was the first time that I had really met him. And he's an astonishing person, full of patience. He's a role model, he's a mentor, he's an inspiration. And I'm so grateful for him for taking a chance on me. And I didn't know that he thought I was gonna die. I just was like asking, and the way I think I got his attention, or the way he tells the story, is that in my email I did put my qualifications, which were that I'd already pedaled about probably about 30,000 miles on bike tours. I'd canoed the Missouri River and I'd walked across the country. And so I wasn't shy about going on trips. And I think that caught his attention, and now here we are. But I guess one more thing to say about scientists is I emailed so many scientists for my book, because my goal was to not get it wrong as far as we knew at that moment of publication. And it astonished me every time someone replied, and people were excited to talk about science. And I would just literally send them pages sometimes and just, hey, could you just read this and just make sure what I'm saying exactly word for word isn't misinterpreting anything. And they would read it and they would say, it looks good, or change this. And I'm profoundly grateful.
Can you tell us any of the other scientists that you spoke to?
Yes, one that I spoke with a lot was Steve Rupert. I think that's how you say his name. I've written his name a lot, but he does a lot of work with navigation and like how monarchs are navigating with these internal compasses in their antenna, and they're tracking not just the position of the sun in the sky, but also the electromagnetic field and UV radiation patterns. And it was a mouthful all the time. And so I really wanted to make sure that I got all that right. And I spoke with some folks that are doing roadkill studies. I can't remember their names off the top of my head, with more navigation stuff, and even just like some theories with some grad students, and they would direct me to the right place. And it was fun. I enjoyed learning. And I mean, I could write a whole nother book right now, because so much cool stuff is happening and continues to come out.
Well, this is very fabulous to know, because basically not many of those topics, if any, are covered in the popular books of the day. And to get that kind of information in an adventure novel is just a double bonus, because it's so easy to read. When you were writing, what did you learn on the way that you didn't know before?
Everything. I mean, I left on that bus ride to Mexico knowing that the monarchs spent the winter in Mexico, and that they went to Canada, and that they needed milkweed. And that was like pretty much it. And my strategy for adventures is to let go with the flow. And so I rarely plan nightly stays. I might plan one stay along the route, but I don't want to know where I'm going to be every night, because I want there to be the opportunity to say yes to some random invitation I can't predict, including, like, my example is always, what if I meet someone that owns a chocolate factory and they invite me to eat all the chocolate I could possibly eat down the road? And if I've lined up hotels or campgrounds, I'd have to say, no, I got to be at this campground, or my whole schedule will be off. So I really didn't have a plan. And the same with the science, is like, I left knowing the basics, and I just learned so much along the way by staying with people, by simply just being out there. Like, I learned a lot just in the side of the road, like on a little break, looking at a caterpillar, watching this caterpillar on some milkweed. Like, that's how we learn, is by just making observations. And so I just learned as I went. And then of course I kept learning. And I honestly, I consider the monarchs my teachers. Like, they've taught me a lot by kind of just leading the way, literally.
So, but I imagine once you were writing the book, because there's so much detailed science in there that you had to fill it in with the scientific knowledge, and contact the scientist again, because now you knew which questions to ask.
Right. Yeah. And so that was just, for folks that don't know, you can go on Google, you type in Google Scholar, and you can type in monarch, and you can get a million papers on monarchs. And I would read them, and I'd see names would become more and more familiar, and then you just Google their name, and all of a sudden you can send them an email, because most of them are professors. And yeah, it was a fun process.
You mentioned a roadkill specialist, something that I've really been wondering about, and everyone else has too. Why are the monarchs flying at car level when they've got the whole sky? Did you learn anything about that? Any insights?
Well, on my trip, I was sad a lot on my trip, and I think runners, I think cyclists see the road differently than drivers. And I was face to face with so much roadkill, and just, I mean, every mile there was some creature dead on the road, and it gets old. And I started seeing, especially in the fall, I started seeing more and more dead monarchs. And I actually called Chip Taylor, like probably close to tears, just being like, there's all these monarchs. And he was like, oh, we can use them. So he taught me how to fold up their wings and wax paper and mail them to him. And I honestly don't know if he used them for anything. I think maybe part of it was just give this girl something to do that's like productive feeling, so that she won't be so sad. It worked, because I was like, oh yay, research. Every time I'd find one, I probably found 50 or so. And what I noticed is most of them were males. And I talked to Chip about this as well. And in the winter, or excuse me, in the fall, the monarchs are obsessed with getting enough nectar that they can build their fat reserves, because these monarchs that are in Mexico now, they are relying on the fat reserves that they built up in Texas, Oklahoma, and Mexico, mostly on their fall route in general, to survive the whole winter. And they're actually even using those fat reserves to remigrate north in the spring. So if they arrive too skinny, they're going to starve to death. If they don't find those flowers that they need on their trip, they're going to starve to death. And males have a higher metabolic cost. They burn more calories. And so I think males were just more focused on getting that nectar. So they were down lower where the flowers are. The flowers are also at car level.
So Sara, you've been in Mexico for a month or two now, and I'm getting the pictures from Mexico the same as the last couple of years, but different than before that. So in the last couple of years, it doesn't matter when you go to visit the monarchs, they're extremely active. Whereas 5-6 years ago, they weren't active all winter long. And I've been very concerned if they're so active during the winter that they're going to use up their fat reserves.
Yeah, everyone else is like, oh yeah, it's pretty photos. And I'm like, every day that I see them flying, I'm just like up there, just like a stressed out mom, just being like, stop flying. And I'm currently working on a research project that I started to get off the ground in 2020. And I'm training women that live near the monarchs to count them. So the behavior is called streaming, where they'll leave their roosts and they'll fly down the mountain. And usually this is a behavior that's observed in the spring as they're getting ready to remigrate north. But I'm having, right now I have 12 women counting from their houses 3 times a day, all the monarchs that pass in a small area near their house. And so I'm just basically trying to collect proof or baseline data on what monarch activity looks like for the whole season. And with that, we could actually start to compare year to year, and we could start to say, oh yes, with climate change, it's getting warmer and drier there, which means the monarchs are more thirsty, and because they're cold-blooded, they're more active, so they're flying more. And then we might be able to start to equate this to, and that's why we are seeing more starving to death. I haven't seen the more starving part yet, but that seems like a logical conclusion to all of this. So I'm nervous, but time will tell.
Well, thank you for that. I am going to read some of the statistics that you took along the way, and I have about 14 more questions to ask, but I am going to open it up to the group. So if you have a question and you have read the book, put your hand up, and I'm going to give a few of you a chance to ask your questions before I ask the rest of my 14 questions. So here's some of the statistics that Sara took while she was on her trip. How many miles did she go? 10,201. She had 4 flat tires. She saw 722 adult monarchs, 82 car-killed adults. She counted 252 eggs, 245 caterpillars, and she told her story to 9,140 people. So that is something. Sara,
I have to interrupt to tell a story. That my trip was in 2017. In 2019, I worked for an organization and led a bike tour from California to Florida. It was a couple-month trip. I learned I'm a terrible leader for adults, but I was in Texas, and it was in October. And in one day, I counted a mile, and then I'd extrapolate. I saw about, I would estimate about 10,000 monarchs. And the whole time I was thinking, where were you when I was on my bike tour? But that's kind of how it is like, I could have planned the perfect route and it would always have been wrong. So I actually didn't see that many monarchs, but I tell folks, the point wasn't to see monarchs, the point was to meet the people that can help the monarch. And I saw plenty of them.
The way, thank you. The way to raise your hand is to go down to reactions, open it up, and then it says raise hand if you want to ask a question. Well, while you're figuring that out, okay, Nicholas, unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, then, while you're figuring out how to unmute yourself, Nicholas, I will ask my next question. Sara, you were wanting to meet people along the way who would do something for the monarchs. How many families did you stay with?
I stayed with 68 families. Most of them were strangers to start. And then, of course, I met so many other people, and I received hospitality from people whose names I never learned. And I was invited to schools and by lots of teachers and administrators who took a chance on me. My bike is, I'll show you a picture of my bike later, but it's nothing fancy. But yeah, 68 people let me stay at their houses. And I think that experience bonds me to the monarch, because a monarch also needs that hospitality. A monarch can't do this trip without people inviting them to their house. And so the call to action, of course, as most of us probably know, is we need to plant native plants in our yards. We need to get that milkweed in the ground. The latest science says we need to plant 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. So it's all of us are needed, just like a cyclotourist needs people along the way to help them out.
And are any, have you noticed any of your hosts here? Are there any of the people who welcomed Sara into their homes, or put your hand up if you welcomed Sara into your home? Okay, there are other people here for you to meet though, but right now, Suzanne is going to unmute and ask her question.
Yes, I love that quote. A monarch can't make the trip to Mexico unless you brought them to your house. That's wonderful. I do have a question though.
Suzanne is AKA the Butterfly Lady. Tens of thousands of people see her inspirational monarch and pollinator posts every week. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Right. And I try and encourage people to create habitat, to plant milkweed and to plant the flowers they need to nectar on. So I found that amazing what you just said, Sarah. I do have a question because I noticed recently that they had a little bit of a snowstorm, a little snowstorm there in the mountains of central Mexico. And I know in the past that has been detrimental to some of them, but I would like to know, does anyone know what is the exact temperature that they can endure when they're clustered together in the trees?
Like 60 degrees.
60 degrees.
So the issue with monarchs in the cold is complicated by the fact that cold on by itself isn't necessarily dangerous for monarchs. Yes, if it gets too cold, they'll freeze to death. And I don't know the exact threshold, but what's the issue becomes when they get wet and then they get cold. And what happens is if they're wet on the outside, they'll form ice crystals, which can radiate into their bodies and freeze them on the inside. And so typically in the forest in Mexico, there's these microclimates that have to do with using the canopy of the trees as kind of a blanket. The temperature is also slightly warmer on the tree trunks. And then also the canopy protects them from rain. And then individual monarchs on the outside of a cluster are more likely to get wet and then possibly freeze in the inner cluster. And so there's all these little microclimates happening. The detrimental storms come when there's a prolonged storm where they get wet, and then there's multiple days of cold, and they can't recover as quickly. So when we're looking at the weather, it's the cold scares me less than cold and wet. And I think that there was some rain the last few weeks, but I haven't heard reports of mass die-offs anywhere.
Thank you very much. That was exactly what I was thinking, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to call on Dawn to unmute, and then Dawn Davis. And after that, Sarah is going to show us a few slides from her trip.
May I share my screen or try to share my screen, Carol?
Not if it's a picture of
Okay.
Sarah on her bike. Okay, yes, you can. Go ahead.
I know what picture it's going to be, I think.
No, I don't think I can do that, but
Well, Dawn, why don't you let me do it? Is this what you wanted?
yes.
How did I know? How did I know? We did not set this up, folks. This was going to be my surprise shot for Sarah to see whether she knew where it was. But now we've connected it already to you, Dawn. But it's still going to be fun. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sure a great memory from Greenway Blooming Center near Breslau. And the other photo was of enjoying that great ice cream cone at Franny's.
That's the one I was picturing. With you and with help me out.
Barb hacking?
No, in the picture, was it Barb in the picture? I know Barb was with us. Oh, it was her husband, Mark.
Yeah, Mark was there. I think he took the picture.
Okay, well, you know what, Sarah? Maybe you can show us another picture of you enjoying ice cream.
Well, I do have a picture of screen. Let me share. I'll share a few photos.
And while you're getting that ready, Sarah, I want to let you know that Audrey and I are going to be very close to Hershey, Pennsylvania in October, and we would love to join you for a major pig out at the Hershey Chocolate Factory.
All right, deal. It's funny because in my presentation on my bike tour, I started talking about ice cream, and then ice cream became like a character that was on my trip with me, and I ate a lot of ice cream, and I was okay with that. But let me I'm going to skip this picture for now, but there's my bike set up for folks that are interested. You can see my bike is nothing special. It's just an old beat up mountain bike with panniers. And I don't know, can anyone notice what these back rear panniers are repurposed from? Well, I'll just tell you, they're old kitty litter buckets. So
That's
you
what I was
don't need
gonna
to,
say.
you don't need to have anything fancy. Like as long as your bike's comfortable, it'll get the job done. But and then the other picture that I think helps kind of put things in perspective is my route. So I started in Michoacan in March, and I went north all the way up into Canada. I did this loop so I could go visit Dawn, because people in Southern Ontario kept emailing me and kept saying, you gotta come visit. And all the zigs and zags in my route come from invitation. But before I left, it was really just going to be a straight shot north and south. And this whole route took me about 8.5 months. So I finished up back at where I started at the end of November. So I was actually behind the main migration. And then there's the ice cream shot. So I like to tell this story of like being on the most boring, hot, tiring road in Mexico. And then I see this motorcycle getting closer, and like, I'm an introvert. My first reaction is like, what does this guy want? I don't want to deal with him. But I stopped, try to say yes as much as I can. And then he's like, hey, do you want some ice cream? And this is just like one tiny glimpse into what it's like to bike tour. It's like, you can't predict these moments. And if you're in a plane or on a bus or you're driving, like you're not going to have them, or at least not as frequently. So by kind of being vulnerable, I open myself up to these invitations. And these are the moments you remember. And these are what makes a good story. Not the everything went great. I went from camp spot to camp spot and everything was fine. Like, well, that's a good story, but it's a little less exciting. And then Carol, should I show a few more photos, or?
Yes, show a few more.
Let's see what else I've got here. This is, I put this picture up just to kind of explain myself. I've come to see my book as a balance between my hope and my anger. And I was very, very angry on my trip, because I knew the science, and I knew the statistics that we were losing the monarch population, and we were losing them because they don't have their habitat. We've taken their home. And every step that we all take today was on their land, or was their land at some point. And we've got to learn to share. We've got to bring it back, and we've got to manage the little bit that's left. And this picture is to showcase that in a lot of places, especially in the Corn Belt, the last habitat the monarchs have is the roadside. And we treat the roadside as a piece of trash. And we don't think about the fact that that's the last spot the monarchs have. And so there's a big effort right now to help municipalities time their mowing. If in Canada, I just found all these just beheaded milkweeds, and every single beheaded milkweed that had just been cut down, every single one had either an egg or a first instar caterpillar. So the really tiny rice-sized ones. And if they had mowed 2 weeks earlier, then that milkweed would have been fresh. It would have been perfect for mom monarchs. Same with this. They're mowing this was the fall. This is when flowers and nectar are just the most important. This is when those fifth instar caterpillars or chrysalids are just waiting, and they're just mowing it down. And it broke my heart. And I would see this for a mile, and I would just sit in my frustration and my anger, and I would just get more and more mad. And people expected me to show up and be like, I love butterflies. And I showed up being like, why did they mow? And like looking around at all the grass and all the places that we take and we don't even use. Most people don't even use all that grass in their front yards. And so my rally call was, we've got to start to share. We've got to start taking care of the land that's still remaining and still pristine. We've got to get monarchs in our yards. And then the message that we've also got to be angry. Like, the monarch needs us to be angry, but we also have to have hope. And so my balance came from seeing the world that we're bestowing on the next generation, but then meeting so many people doing amazing things, and reminding myself that all of us are connected by monarchs, and we're connected by each other's work. And let's see, this is the perfect segue. I took this picture actually this year. I rode my motorcycle from Kansas City to Mexico, And I stayed with some of the same people that I did on my bike tour, including this woman named Val in Southern Missouri. And we're looking at her yard. She has this beautiful front yard garden. And I find this monarch. And this monarch is like just eclosed. So you can see their chrysalis right there. They've just eclosed. Their wings have just kind of spread out. They're drying. This monarch will probably fly around for a few days and then was destined to go to Mexico. And
I
it,
hate
and this,
to see that happen every year.
and this monarch exists only because Val made the choice to plant milkweed in her yard. I think the shadow in this picture is from her mailbox. So we're talking, I took this picture from the curb of her driveway, and there were two monarchs we found that exist only because of her. And this year was especially brutal for the monarchs in the South because of the drought, and every monarch counts, every milkweed counts. And my trip united these people by me staying with so many different people along the way, and just reminding everyone that like small is big and all of our efforts add up. And so get that milkweed in the ground, and maybe the great granddaughter of this monarch will show up in your yard next spring, which is just so beautiful.
So this is why it's so important for groups like the Monarch Ultra, Sara Dykman, and another guy that we're going to meet very soon to get the word out, because I'll end that conversation on a very positive note. Sara, I have a Google alert that gives me all the news every day of what's going on with monarchs. And I'm just getting an awful lot more news about people who are going to their city councilors and getting them to mow at the right time. So in Ontario, it's getting to be more and more conscientious about mowing, and maybe one day, with everybody's help, we will get it all right. Okay, Bev, why don't you unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, Sarah, my husband's a biker, and he was curious what the sign on the back of your bike was.
On the back of my bike, I'd drawn on like some corrugated cardboard, plastic, like a political campaign sign kind of material, my route with my website. And so sometimes people want to talk to you on a bike, but they don't know how to start. And so the sign was like a nice way to like kind of lead them into a conversation. Or if my bike was in front of a grocery store, they could type in the route or type in. The other thing I've noticed from other trips is it's one thing to say you've biked a long distance, it's another to see it on a map. So I could say, oh, I biked here from Mexico. And then they'd look at the map and they'd be like, what? So just another way to call attention to the monarchs in my trip. But good observation.
Okay, I'm going to call upon a special guest early because we don't know how well his internet is going to work up at his cottage, Anthony. So I learned about Anthony a few weeks ago, and he's got a very ambitious project of running himself from Canada to Mexico. He's going to start in August. I am super excited about him possibly letting me help in some way. So Anthony, why don't you unmute yourself and tell us what you're up to, and what people like us can do along the way to help spread your word.
Hi, Carol. Hi, everyone. Hi, Sarah. What a coincidence that we actually had a brief chat not too long ago. So really happy to be invited today and to have this opportunity to meet you guys. Sarah, all the respect for what you've done, especially the bike ride, the book, but all the research and seriousness that you've put in this cause. It's quite inspiring. Very, very briefly, I am going to leave from Montreal on August 1st, 2023. I'll be running an ultra marathon and heading towards Mexico, Michoacan. I will be traveling with my wife, Nancy, who's just right next to me, and our daughter, Laurence, who is now 9, will be 10 next summer. And we will be raising awareness and funds for the cause as we run as I run along that amazing route. So in a nutshell, that's a project that is quite similar to Sarah's one, but not biking, but running. So that's about it, Carol.
Okay, well, be sure to put your website in the chat so that people can keep track of what you're doing and help along the way. I'm sure if we know where you are, we're going to want to dress up in something silly and welcome you. Are you going to run through Toronto?
Yes, it's our plan. I will be leaving Montreal at the Montreal Insectarium, and we'll be heading in Ontario, crossing. There probably is going to be an event in Toronto just before leaving Canada, and then heading to Windsor, Detroit, and then going south. I won't be naming all the cities, but basically heading south, entering Mexico from its northeastern region, and then crossing over the Sierra Madre and ending in Michoacan. So in a nutshell, 4,500 kilometers is our plan, running approximately between 50 and 75 Ks per day.
How
And
many
I will
days-
definitely
How many days a week?
7 days a week for now.
7 days?
Yeah, 7 days a week, and I'll definitely leave the link for our webpage. All of this is still building. We're still creating all of the websites and so on, but I'll definitely be keeping you posted for sure.
Okay, then I don't know when the blisters are supposed to heal if you're going 7 days a week. Sarah, I'm going to ask the next question. At what point in your journey did you decide to write a book? Before, during, or after?
On my other trips that I've done, people always ask me if I'm going to write a book, and I'd always ask, would you buy it? But I never had anything that important to say. Like I love adventures, but I don't get a lot out of reading about them, other people's adventures. It's not for me so much. But on my trip, about halfway through, I realized that I had something I needed to say. And so I actually met this random guy in a park, and we shook each other's hands and promised we'd both write a book in New York. It was somewhere in upstate New York. And I have a picture of him. I don't know his name or where he is, but I did it.
Wow. And had you been journaling every day up until then?
Yeah, on all my trips, I write and journal every night. And sometimes it's very small and short. I actually was inspired by his nickname was the Planet Walker, and he gave up cars and speaking I think it was in the 70s. And he just walked for like 2 decades without talking. And he wrote a haiku every night, or a lot of haikus. And so I adopted that. On my most tired nights, I would just write a haiku, but that was usually enough to kind of spur memories. And I also took a lot of photos, and that could help, that helped as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Nicholas, you've been very patient. Why don't you unmute and ask your question?
I have been thinking about walking out to the road to stop these small people from cutting the milkweed in.
Yeah, I had a moment where I just was like so full of rage, and I just wanted to like stomp on this guy's up to his porch and be like, you killed the monarchs. And like I really had to wrangle it in, because that's just unproductive. And most people, once they know that this is important habitat, then they're more sympathetic. And it's just a matter of educating folks. And then I say it so many times, but if all of us tonight taught someone tomorrow, and they taught someone tomorrow, then like it would happen. We would spread the word enough. And it is happening, just like you said, Carol. Like it's in the news, it's in the zeitgeist, it's just in the ether. Like people know about monarchs, and I consider monarchs gateway bugs, because you first learn about them, and then you learn about the tussock moths and the painted ladies. You like start to learn about all the other animals. And so think that first invitation is so important. And I think having that example, and you have to be brave to be the example, especially if your yard is counterculture and maybe looks a little messy. Like, you have to be brave, but it matters. And so speaking up and being the example is so important. And it's great. Like, look at this team that we have. Like, it's good to know that maybe when you're sad looking at the side of the road, I could think, Carol would be sad too, and she'd say, let's go do something and let's fix this. And it helps to remember that you're part of something big.
Yeah, I was reading about all your little adventures during the day, and you took time to swim, you painted, sketched, journaled. About how many hours a day did you cycle, and did you have enough time to amuse yourself as much as you wanted to?
So to put Anthony's bike or running trip in context, he says he wants to go 50 kilometers a day. I was going like 100 kilometers a day, which is like 60 miles. And so good job. That's amazing. I'm like, right now, I'm like, this is what I'm feeling about his run. Like, other people must feel about my bike ride. Like, what? So it's a good perspective to have. But 60 miles on a bike is just it's pretty mellow. You know, even if you're going 10 miles an hour, that's 6 hours of riding, and there's 15 hours of daylight in the summer. So there was a lot of time to spare, like you said, to stop. And because I call it stealth camping. I never paid to camp. You can't really set up your tent before that much sooner than dusk. So I would bike until sunset, or often I'd bike into the night. I love night biking. So I had so much time. And sometimes I would get so caught up in like, oh, bike 2 minutes, stop and look at milkweed. Bike 1 minute, stop and look at milkweed. And I never get my momentum, and I'd look at my speedometer and be like, yikes, I've only gone like 15 miles today. So I'd have to like almost put on blinders so that I wouldn't look at the sides of the road and I wouldn't get distracted, and I could just make some progress. I also never woke up early. I slept in. On other trips, I have bike bells on my handlebars, and I would ring a bike bell if I could do 10 miles before 10 a.m. because I'd hate the mornings. I always have, I think I always will. So it's pretty mellow. Like, it's very accessible.
Now, I heard that your book was coming out in paperback.
It is, yeah. It's pretty exciting. I'll have a paperback version, and I love the cover. It's like, to me, it's better than the other cover. It's got like a more like messy font, and it's got some yellow in it. Let's see. I've got.
And does it have some of your sketches and photographs in it, Sarah?
No, it's funny. In the contract for this book, the language was mutually agreed upon title art, or chapter art, excuse me. And I wanted one picture from my trip on each chapter. And the publisher said, in the end, it was not mutually agreed upon. And I didn't fight it, because you want to have a good relationship with your publisher, as I'm sure you know from your work. But I fought other things. I had to pick my battles. And they said that as a woman, in order to be taken seriously, you can't have whimsical drawings, as they called them. So they told me my art was too whimsical and would decrease people's ability to take me seriously.
Well, isn't that fascinating? There is a huge pent up demand, Sarah, for your sketches and artwork. And now, it's picking your battles. Boy, have I learned that. However, if you sell enough to do a reprint, you may be able to get them to agree to one here and one there. As long as you keep selling the book and they have to do reprints, it's not a big deal for them to change a page or two and put in something you like. I've had them change a lot. So everybody go out and buy this paperback, and so that we can get a further edition later on the road with some of Sarah's terrific sketches. I'm lucky enough to own a few. And do you know what the list price for that is going to be?
$18.99,
Okay.
$23.99 in Canada.
All right. Well, we're getting seriously affordable. Of course, we can get any of these books from the library, which is always a good idea. But if you do buy it, make sure you pass it around the whole neighborhood so that they read it too. And Sarah told me that she's writing a kid's book. Sarah, tell us about your kid's book.
Yeah, my audience, when I set out to do this trip, my goal was to talk to 10-year-olds. I love telling 5th, 6th graders about nature and science. They're so excited. The future is still wide open. But they also understand that they have a future. And so I started to write my book for them. And I just realized that at first I needed to get what I really wanted to say to all the people I met on the way out. And that was a little bit of therapy, I think. And so now I'm going back and writing a version for kids. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to get my art in that. And I've done the first draft through, and I've sent out a letter to an agent, and I'm trying to do this the real way. I got really lucky on my adult version. I wrote an article in a magazine, and 6 publishers reached out to me. So I didn't have to do the hard groundwork like so many authors do. So stay tuned, hopefully.
Okay. Well, yes, we're going to stay tuned. And if you let me know, I will let my peeps know too, which will be very exciting. And I want to introduce another VIP right now. And his name is Sid. Sid, if you're there, unmute. Unmute yourself. Okay, well, we'll wait for Sid to show up. Sid,
Hola, Carol.
There is Sid. Now, Sarah, you're going to meet Sid when we come down at the end of February. In fact, Sid is a tour guide in Mexico, and I'm going on his 4th trip of the season with a group of people, but he'll be there from the beginning of February. And Sarah, he's going to want to meet you. You're going to want to meet him. He's a local, so he knows absolutely everything. He's the best tour guide ever. And I wanted to say hello, Sid.
Hola, Carol. Hello, everyone. Yes, actually, she probably does not remember me, but I met her in El Rosario. She came down to El Rosario with her bike, and then I met her. She was translating for the locals and helping with tourists and everything, and she was waiting for March to start the bike path. So
my Spanish is much better now.
Oh my, you saw her before she started riding.
Cool.
Exactly. I met her in 2017. No, that was the winter that she was there. So yeah, it was amazing. Some of my group met her as well. And then, yeah, I've been following her since then. Yeah, pretty amazing. I mean,
we'll all be together and meet her again at the same time, but of course you'll know her really well by the time we get there, and you'll have all kinds of advice. And Sarah, you have been so modest on your Spanish, and now even before you went, Sid says you were translating for the tourist. Well, now that's
yes, she was helping, like you know that big room that they have in El Rosario.
Yes, that's fun room. We have to go in there.
Well, when the people struggle to communicate with tourists that don't speak Spanish, she was translating and everything. I was just possibly another Mexican for her, but yeah, I talked to her. And I'm a cyclist myself, no? Like, actually, it's very funny because I was preparing a bike trip in 2017. So I did Alaska to Mexico City on my bicycle. So I know exactly what she talks about. I know what she went through. I know what it is to cycle the whole continent. And it's impressive, no? But she does it with a cost that is impressive. So it's double effort, double everything. Because I understand.
I'm extra excited to hear that. That's something I didn't know about you. And we're going to talk about that on the bus. That'll be really
yes. I tell you a million stories. I encountered like 20 bears and stuff. Yeah.
So this is the guy. If you're going to go to see the the sanctuaries, this is the guy to go with, and then you can get all the information from me, or you can get it from the chat because he's going to put his website there.
Yes, correct.
We have, oh, and Kylie's telling you that she's going to be there and she wants to meet you. We have several authors here tonight. We have Kylie Baumley, who has written Save Our Monarch, something like that.
Yeah, I follow Kylie on the Facebook, yeah.
Okay, good.
Well,
And Debbie Clement, and forgive me when I pronounce all your names wrong. And
thank you. Thank you, Carol, for giving me the chance. And just wanted to congratulate you, señorita. Well done. Muy bien. Huh? Big effort. And thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, at this time, I want to make sure that nothing has been left out. So if there's an important first, Sarah, is there something that we left out that you wanted to get across?
Just got to plant milkweed. So it's winter now, but start thinking about either getting the seeds in the ground, putting the seeds, all the milkweed seeds, they have to be cold stratified. So they need to think that they've gone through winter. And an easy way to do that is to put a seed outside so that they can go through winter. So it might feel like a weird time to get started, but now's the time.
Yes, gardening absolutely starts in the middle of winter, and very exciting. People are starting to germinate common milkweed seeds without cold stratifying them. If you have some milkweed seeds, Leo, you've got to try this. Do a video, and everybody is just clipping off the end and putting it in a bag of water. And they're germinating. So I want everybody to experiment with this and let me know. And Leo probably has about 10 million seeds, so it's easy for him to experiment. And is there anyone here who has an important announcement that all the Monarch enthusiasts should know before I announce our next Zoom? Audrey is trying to say something.
Winter sowing is important.
Audrey would have to unmute if she wanted to say something. And if she doesn't want to say it to everybody, she'd have to come upstairs. I should introduce you to my lovely and talented co-host. This is my lovely and talented co-host, Audrey. She is my wife. And she's saying that people are having their hands up because they do want to say something. Okay, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. That's why I paid you the big bucks. So you got 30 seconds, Dolly. What have you got to say? Unmute yourself.
Hey, don't forget to winter sow your milkweed because it is a fantastic way to get fantastic germination.
Okay, then.
So if you don't know about winter sowing, it's the milk jug method.
The milk jug method. If you don't know about the milk jug method, either Dolly,
that's what I want from Dolly.
Going to put a link in the side, or you're just going to Google how to germinate your milkweed. And
I'll put a link to my class on YouTube.
She's got a class on YouTube. Awesome. Now I'm thinking that Danis Plexipus might be Juliana Danis. So unmute yourself, Danis Plexipus, and you got 30 seconds to make your important announcement.
Sarah, I want to know whether you're going to come to see me before you go back to Mexico.
I've been meaning to call you. That's Chip, everybody.
That is the greatest stunt ever, Chip. That is such a good stunt. Danis Plexipus is Chip Taylor. He's doing a drop in. He's been here the whole time incognito because he didn't want to take away Sarah's thunder. How cute is that? It's so nice. You wear such a something else.
Chip, I just want to say that those weather stations, thermometers, about a month worth of data is 90,000 lines in Excel. So boy, howdy, my computer's struggling. But yes.
Yeah, we've got to talk about what you're doing, Sarah. And I've been monitoring your weather stations, and they're still producing data. At least they were a couple days ago. And I think this is a really good acquisition, learning more about what the weather conditions are at the overwintering sites. I mean, we have researchers that have been doing that, but the data has not been made public. And so I've been trying to make these data that you're gathering from those weather stations as public as I can, so people have a better understanding of what's going on at the overwintering sites.
Okay.
So for those of you who have not been on Facebook today, Chip has made his prediction for what the overwintering numbers are going to be. So go to the Monarch Watch Facebook page and read that, or monarchwatch.org, and read what Chip's prediction is. And I was lucky enough to see Chip at the 30th anniversary of Monarch Watch, and that's where I met Sara. So only really good things happen when you're around Chip Taylor. And I'm going to tell you about the next Beat the Winter Blues Zoom. It's going to be with Lorraine Johnson. It's about her book, A Garden for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee. And if you're not overly concerned about the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, not to worry. We could have labeled this How to Build a Pollinator Garden. Okay, Lorraine Johnson, this is about her 8th book. So you're going to want to attend, and you're going to hear about it. It's going to be next month. And now I want to thank our guest for taking time out for her extremely busy schedule and speaking to us tonight. This has been enormously fun. Thank you so much, Sara, for coming.
Thanks for making this happen. And thanks everyone for liking Monarchs. This is awesome. Loving Monarch, sorry.
Okay, bye. Anybody who wants to leave can leave. And the last few of us can all unmute and have a free-for-all if you want.
How far does Monarchs travel?
They fly all the way to Mexico, 4,000 kilometers. Who else wants to chat?
I'll say something. I noticed my husband loves to watch Jeopardy. And right before I connected, there was a question on Jeopardy tonight on the monarch butterfly. And they wanted to know what regal butterflies, caterpillars, eat milkweed. That was the question. So if you want to watch reruns, there you go. Another way to get the word out.